Hello, good people. It is great to be back with you in what I hope is going to be a very blessed new year for all of us. The conversations in this part of the internet, in our little corner of the internet, I should say conversations, have been coming thick and fast, and boy, have they been interesting. And there have been a number of conversations that I want to respond to lately in this corner of the internet, because I think there are some little threads or themes that we can kind of draw together and maybe explore together. So here is sort of a rundown of some of the videos that I'm going to try to tie together thematically in this video. And if you haven't seen any of the particular videos that I reference, I am going to put links to all of them in the description. Excuse me. So the first one is Jonathan Pageau's video on his channel of a talk he gave about Christian iconography at, I think it's pronounced St. Tikhon Seminary. And that was quite fascinating. I have a few thoughts about what he said there. Then J.P. Marceau, who I have had the privilege of talking to, had a couple of discussions that are quite fascinating. One was a discussion with Jonathan Pageau, and he also had a conversation with Craig Stewart. Now, his conversation with Jonathan Pageau was about some ideas he had taking the structure of reality that Jonathan Pageau shows in the iconography, and showing how it goes through even levels like into our cells, into the process of digestion, things like that. J.P. Marceau is doing some fascinating stuff. And then he also had a talk with Craig Stewart about Rene Girard and some further thoughts about these patterns that we see in reality. So I'm going to talk about that. Then Guy Sangstock had a wonderful conversation with Leo Ferraro, and he also had two conversations with Christopher Mastropietro. And one of his conversations with Christopher, they talked about the thou structure of the world, looking at the world as a thou. And then they did a second video where they went over the comments on the first video. I can see this becoming a new internet or a new YouTube art form, and this is going to geometrically expand the number of videos we have. People start making videos about the comments on their previous videos, but it was great. Paul Vanderklay had a conversation with a man named Voth. Oh, that was just amazing. What an intellect that guy has. Isn't it great how many wonderful intellects not associated with academia we are finding on the internet now on YouTube? So there were some points also that I want to bring in from a couple of videos that are not exactly in our little corner of the internet, but they kind of touch on some of these things. Now, there's an overarching theme that I'm trying to elaborate on here that gets touched on by all of these different videos and different conversations. And it's a theme that was in the conversation that I had with J.P. Marceau when we were answering Vervaeke, and then the conversation that John Vervaeke, J.P. Marceau, and I had together. And so the question, the overarching question, and this has also come up between John Vervaeke and Paul Vanderklay. And the conversation, or the theme, is the question of whether ultimate reality is personal or impersonal. Like whether when we come in contact with the numinous, when we come in contact with the realm of what we might call the divine, are we coming in contact with something personal or something impersonal? So that's something that I want to discuss a little bit. And underneath that question, there are some other themes that have to do with relations, with human relations. So these themes have to do with the family, with political power, and also with the relationship between masculinity and femininity, or we might say with the relationships between males and females. So I want to try to link these threads together and see what happens. So Jonathan Pajot, when he was talking about icons, he often says this, and I think it's a great phrase. He says that the icons show us how reality lays itself out. And I really like that expression that he uses. Reality lays itself out. In other words, when we look at the icons, we're not looking at artist renditions of illustrations of Bible stories. It's not like the purpose of the icon is to illustrate a story in the Bible, like you might find if you open up a child's Bible storybook and then there's some picture of some artist rendition of some story in the Bible. That's not what the icons are for. Now, he makes this very clear when he is talking about the icons of the Ascension. So in the icons of the Ascension, you will see certain figures on the ground under Christ. Christ is ascending or has ascended. And on the ground, you will see the Virgin Mary, who may also represent the church, and you will see St. Peter and St. Paul. Now, if you go and you read the story in the Bible of the Ascension, you will not find mention that Mary was there. You will not find mention of St. Paul there. In fact, we know that St. Paul wasn't there because St. Paul was not a follower of Christ at that time. So the question that Jonathan Pajot asked is, well, why are they there? It's because it's not illustrating that particular event as a story directly out of the Bible, but rather showing how the church is constituted, and by extension, how reality lays itself out. Because the way the church is constituted is just one more of the levels of reality. Now, in the way that reality lays itself out, there are patterns of what we might call opposition. So Jonathan Pajot goes into some of these. There's what's inside and what's outside. There's what's coming towards the center. There's what's going away from the center. There's the act of drawing things in and of sending things forth. And I want to focus a little bit on that particular structure and the way that Jonathan Pajot expressed it with regard to a particular iconography that is both within Christianity and is in the figure of Christ, but also, as he demonstrated in his talk, it precedes Christian iconography because we find it originally even in Roman depictions of the emperors. And this is the depiction of a figure, usually a regal figure, a powerful figure, who is holding in one hand a scroll or a book, and then is gesturing with the other hand. Now, what Jonathan Pajot is bringing out is that this is a figure, of course, when it's Christ, it's a divine figure, and is talking about divine authority and divine power, all of that. But even when we look at it in the realm of looking at a figure of one of the Caesars, what is the idea here of holding a scroll in one hand and gesturing with the other hand? Jonathan Pajot brings out that this has to do with the conferring of authority. So there is a legal structure that confers the authority. That comes from outside of the emperor. It's the entire structure of the Roman law under which the emperor himself operates or is acknowledged as the emperor, then the other hand, the hand that is gesturing, is demonstrating the actions of this figure toward those over whom he is ruling. And this is, Jonathan Pajot then applies this even to like the bishops of the church, that they have an authority that's given them, and he calls that an authority. He looks at that as a structure having to do with the outside, and then their the power that they have, he calls it the inside power, and that would be the sacramental power, the power to give blessings, things like that. I think that was very interesting. I would really like you to look at his video. Like I said, I'll put a link to the video in the description if you haven't seen it. But I want to tweak what he said here just a little bit in terms of this dynamic of the getting the authority and having the power. Because what I would like to do instead is to question or possibly tweak that use of the word power. So instead of authority and power, I think it might be better to look on it as authority and responsibility. And I'm going to kind of go into why I think that might possibly work as a better construction. Okay, so I want to use some illustrations to say how this works, and I want to use the family as the illustration. So parents have authority. This would be what comes down to them from God, and they have that authority in order to exercise a responsibility toward their children. And in both cases, in both the case of the acceptance or the conferring of the authority and they're having a responsibility, in the center of that sits personal power. In other words, it's a power or a faculty of the person to be able to have authority conferred upon them. And it's also a faculty or power of the person to exercise that authority as a responsibility on behalf of those who are in their care or who are under their authority. So it's a flow that comes from above and comes through the person to those below them, and it is a flow of love. I want to avoid the use of the word power only as a thing that is being expressed toward those below, because I don't think that captures the entire structure. And even when Jonathan Pajot was talking about it, he accidentally, in one of his sentences, used the word power in place of the word authority. So I think that is a little bit confusing. I think what we want to go with is authority and responsibility. Now, God never gives responsibility without authority. He does not give authority without responsibility. So going back to the family, the parents have authority in order to exercise their responsibility. And responsibility means that they have the ability to respond. That would be the ability to respond to the needs of the children that they have to take care of. So let's see a little bit about how this flow can operate just even within the family. So let's say you have a couple of parents and they want to go out for the evening. Now, normally in the past, they would hire a babysitter for their children. But on this particular night, they take a look at their 14-year-old who has recently asked for something a little bit pricey, maybe like a special article of clothing or something that she has her eye on. And so the parents have come up with a little plan together, and they say to the 14-year-old, they say, you know, now that you're getting older, we think that you could take on the responsibility of babysitting your younger brother and sister tonight while we go out. And if you do, then we will pay you the money that we would have paid the babysitter, and then you can earn this thing that you are wanting to buy. So what they will do is then they will give instructions to that older child. The instructions will say that the child is going to take care of an 8-year-old brother and a 4-year-old little sister. So the parents may even write instructions down. They'll give the child, their phone numbers of where they're going to be, and, instructions for what the bedtimes are of the 2 younger children. You put the 4-year-old to bed at this particular time. Make sure that both of them eat their dinner. Make sure that the 8-year-old goes to bed at his bedtime. Make sure they brush their teeth before they go to bed. Say the prayers with the little one, and there'll be a set of instructions. Then they'll turn to the younger children and say, now, don't you give your sister any trouble, because if you do, she's going to tell us tomorrow if you are not cooperating with her. You make sure you cooperate with her and you do what she says. And then they leave the house. The 14-year-old has the task of giving the younger ones dinner, keeping them occupied during the evening, making sure they get their teeth brushed and get ready for bed on time and get into bed on time. But she has homework to do. She wants to make sure she gives some attention to her homework too. So she tells the 2 younger ones to go to the shelf and pull out a game and play it. And the little 4-year-old wants to play Chutes and Ladders. And the 8-year-old is like, oh no, not that game again. And the 8-year-old comes to the 14-year-old and says, you know what? She wants to play Chutes and Ladders. I hate that game. I don't ever want to play that game again. And the 14-year-old says, well, tell you what, how about this? Instead, get out Uno and teach her how to play Uno. You would be great at teaching her how to play Uno. And then the next time the cousins come over and we're playing Uno, she'll be able to play Uno. And the 4-year-old balks, and the 4-year-old says, I don't want to play that. I want to play Chutes and Ladders. I don't want to play Uno. And the older one looks at the little one and says, well, you know what? You'd better play Uno, or you're going to have to go to bed early. Because if you're going to be all cranky and uncooperative, and remember, Mom said you're to cooperate with me. If you're going to be cranky and uncooperative, you're just going to have to go to bed early. So the 4-year-old says, okay, I will play Uno. And so then the 8-year-old is like, do I really have to do this? And the older sister says, you know what? If you do it, when you let me work on my homework, when I get done and I'm putting her to bed, I'll let you play Minecraft on my computer. Deal? And the 8-year-old says, yeah, deal. So she manages the whole situation very well because she's using her own creativity, but notice she's taking the authority and the authority that the parents gave her, and she's using it to exercise her responsibility for the 2 little ones. And the love and the provision of the parents for the younger children is now flowing through her by the authority that the parents gave her. But there's also the aspect of that the parents told the younger ones to be cooperative with her and obey her. So she's able to negotiate with them, but she's able to also use the fact that the parents said that they have to cooperate with her. So it's a flow of love flowing. Comes from God to the parents, then to the children, and now in this case it's flowing from the older child to the younger children. And this flow of love, this ability of the person to be a mediator of love at different levels is, I think, the thing that is illustrated by that icon. The icon showing the scroll in one hand, that's the authority, and then the other hand extended out to have that that authority exercised on behalf of others to carry out a responsibility. Okay, now J.P. Marceau, what he does with all of these levels that Jonathan Pageau shows in the icons as a laying out of reality, J.P. Marceau wants to take it down. So Jonathan Pageau takes it up, shows it with different levels, operating with the levels of the church, the bishops, the government, the whole society, the cosmos, etc. And J.P. Marceau, he takes it the levels down into the cells, into things like digestion, into the molecules and the atoms and all of that, showing how all of these things, these relationships are operating at so many different levels. And so you might think about that. What do you think about that idea of rather than looking at it merely as a structure of power, but looking at it as a flow of love and a mediation of love between the different levels? Okay, so this gets back to the conversation that J.P. Marceau and I had with John Vervaeke, because one of the things that I wanted to say, that I did say to John Vervaeke about, or I said it at least I know in my conversation with J.P. Marceau about answering John Vervaeke, is that it's very important for us to have a way to relativize human power, because unless human authorities recognize that they are that mediator of love and provision from God, there's a tendency to hubris, there's a tendency to tyranny, all of these things. And so having a relativization of human power is extremely important. It's something, it's written into the very structure of the government of the United States, where we recognize that our rights come from God. So they don't come from the government. There is a way to relativize human power. And we can see, if we look at all of the tyranny and the tendency of humans to lord it over one another, that's exactly what Jesus said not to do, right? To lord it over one another. We see that tendency is then obstructed or stopped, or it has a limit when there's a recognition that there's another power above, and that there's an authority that flows through the different levels. I believe that the reason why this works is because it's true, because there is a God, there is a personal God who loves us and who is the source of the authority. Now, one question might be is, could we locate this flow of love in a non-personal ultimate reality, which is the kind of ultimate reality that John Vervaeke wants to argue for? I think that that's kind of difficult to do. Now, this leads to another related theme. Guy Senstock and Christopher Mastropietro, I'm not used to saying his name, had, as part of their conversation, a discussion about the masculine and feminine, and the masculine and feminine as it's seen in different levels of reality. So I loved what they said. It's so true that the penetrating masculine intellect, looking at the world, is looking at the world with a kind of a fascination. The world is attractive to them, to that penetrating masculine intellect. And therefore, there is in the relationship between the intellect and the world a masculine and feminine. Now, intellects do not just belong to men, they also belong to women. But when they approach the world in this penetrating way, they are exercising themselves in a masculine function, I believe. And we see masculinity and femininity at different levels of reality. So then the question is, how is this masculine and feminine located in God? Because we know that God is neither male nor female. All right, I want to refer here to the work of a Catholic, I don't know if she's a theologian or philosophy professor, Dr. Maria Federica, and she teaches at Ave Maria. And I'm going to put a link to a talk she did for the Hildebrand Society. Put a link to that in the description. She was talking about how masculine and feminine are contingent realities. So they're not located in God as masculine and feminine, because God is the necessary being. God is not contingent. They are instead contingent expressions of something that is located in the divine. So what is that? And she said it is the personal act of love. Personal acts of love are, and this is kind of the way she put it, she said they're of two kinds. They're either an act of spontaneous outflow or outgoing, going out of oneself spontaneously, or they are receptive and drawing in. And she said this relationship of love, personal acts of love, is found in the Trinity. And you can see how this relates to the thought of Jonathan Pageau with regard to Christ sitting at the center of reality and the movement out and drawing in. And he does make the point that it's not always that the going out or the pushing away is negative. It's not always a negative, positive thing. It's that both are ways of expressing love. For example, it talks about sending the disciples out into the world to baptize and to teach, right? That is an act of love. Although he's sending them away from himself, he's sending them out on a mission. Okay, so personal acts of love, she says, Maria Federica. So let's just say that there's these two kinds of personal acts of love. Personal acts of love are either a spontaneous going out or a spontaneous giving, you might say, or they are a receiving. And she locates this within the Trinity with the Father, of course, generating the Son from all eternity, the Son receiving from the Father, but then, of course, giving back to the Father. And this relationship of the Father and the Son together, causing the procession of this third person of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit. So she brings out that this relationship, this relationship of the spontaneity and the receptivity together always form a third thing. So it forms a triangle. You can think about it like John Vervaeke's transjective triangle, right? Okay, so what Federica wants to do is to identify the masculine with spontaneity, we might say even with initiative, and the feminine with receptivity, although she's very careful to say that receptivity is not passivity. I said the same thing in one of my videos about femininity not being not being passivity, receptivity not being passivity. Now, I want to tweak what she said just a little bit and offer a possibility for a little bit of a different way to express this. So I've been thinking a lot about this, and you can tell me, maybe I'll have some conversation with some people about this idea. But my idea would be that what I would like to, the way that I would like to explain the masculine is in this way. I would like to call it generative penetration. That what marks the masculine is generative penetration, and the feminine is attractive receptivity. Now, the reason I've chosen that particular phraseology is because, for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think that when we talk about the masculine, we don't want to use language that has the masculine in a kind of a vacuum. So if you just say spontaneity, there's not a necessity for there to be a relation, because you can kind of be all by yourself and do something spontaneous, okay? But if you talk about something that penetrates, or penetration, there's something there that is being penetrated. Of course, this might elicit all kinds of sexual imagery, but we're using this kind of metaphorically, like when I talked about the penetrating intellect of the masculine. But of course, in the physical realm, it's still an expression of the same concept on a different level, right? And the reason I want to say attractive receptivity is because, again, you're not attracting nothing, right? When you are being attractive, you're attracting another. So that I think that what this language does is it captures that there's, in the entire action of both, and it's active, both the masculine and the feminine mode of action are already related to the other. So the masculine is always related to the feminine is always related to the masculine. And I think I would like to avoid language that says that the initiative and spontaneity belongs with the masculine, because I feel like that leads almost naturally to the idea that the feminine is passive, and that's something that we've had to resist in our thinking. So I don't think that is true. I don't think that receptivity is passivity. Now, this is an important conversation right now, the whole realm of how we think about masculine and feminine, how we locate that masculinity and femininity in a God who is not himself male or female. How do we locate that? And I believe that the doctrine of the Trinity gives us a way to locate that within God in a way that no other conception of God gives us. This is an important conversation right now because we have a tremendous amount of conflict between the sexes. There was Rebel Wisdom channel recently had a conversation where somebody was talking about the way that the conflicts that are going on between men and women, and the uncertainty about what constitutes masculinity and femininity on the outside in society is causing a fragmentation internally with people. People don't know how to be masculine, how to be feminine. And of course, because masculinity and femininity do not simply exist in the male or the female, but actually exist in both the male and female, and it's more a matter of proportion and degree. And the theme of the life that the male has that is masculine, and the theme of life of the female has that is feminine, but is not, it doesn't mean that there aren't notes of the other sex within each life, within each human person. And so if you have this tremendous antagonism and conflict out in society between men and women, with a lack of understanding of the feminine and masculine, it ends up being an internal fragmentation to individual people. And we see this in the anger that is coming up with women who just seem to be so angry and hateful toward men, we see it in men, in the lack of confidence they have in themselves as men. And so this is a very serious discussion for our time, and one that I think a genuine Christian conception of how these things are related in God can really be of assistance to. Now, that brings up another topic when we start talking about men. That is a topic that Leo Ferraro and Guy Sengstock hit upon, and also that Paul Vanderklay and Voth hit upon, and that is the topic of fatherhood. So see, when we start talking about how do we locate masculinity and femininity in God, it leads us naturally to the understanding of how fatherhood is originating in God. And that is actually what the Bible says. The Bible says that fatherhood comes from God. And doesn't mean, again, we're not saying that God is a one particular sex is male. God is spirit. So God is neither male nor female. But fatherhood itself comes from God. And there is, within Christianity, there is an honoring of this fatherhood that is anchored in God, that gives a sacred dignity to family life. And the beauty of it was shown so wonderfully in these conversations as these fathers expressed to themselves and the love that they have for their children and for these families. So then the question would be, if these structures of family life are not flowing from and returning to, that is leading us toward ultimate reality, then that's a real disjunction between the human and ultimate reality that I think completely disconnects us from the sacred. Whereas in the phenomenology of religion and the phenomenology of human life, as I mentioned in my video with J.P. Marceau answering John Vervaeke, we have this sense throughout the human family forever, this sense that there's something sacred about family life, that the gods or God is invoked, is present within the vows that and covenants that create a family. And so if we're going to switch to this non-personal conception of God, which is what John Vervaeke is promoting, what happens to that? How do we maintain that sense of the sacredness of family life? I don't see how we do it. What happens then is that we have a sense of the sacred, a sense of the divine that is so far removed or so far disconnected from where we live on earth, in families and in relationships, whether it be the family structure or the political structure or whatever, that how does that concept of the sacred give us the wisdom to apply to these concrete realities that we have to live in and for which we so greatly need wisdom? It also seems to me that an impersonal conception of ultimate reality is disconnected in another way. So here's the problem. When we are in doubt, and John Vervaeke has, I think, elaborated well that there's an ambiguity, right? There's an ambiguity as to whether ultimate reality is personal or impersonal. There's ambiguity. So here's the question. When we're in doubt, do we go to the personal or do we go to the impersonal? So here's an example. let's say that someone is going to demolish a building and they do not know whether there are any homeless people who have taken up residence in the building. What do? Do they say, well, I don't know if anyone's there, so we just go ahead and demolish it? Or do they look and make sure before they demolish it? You can think about a hunter. A hunter's out in the woods and he sees something move behind some bushes and he doesn't know, is it a deer or is it another hunter? Should he pull the trigger, or does he, if he's going to make an error, is he going to err on the side of there being a person there? You see, when we're in doubt in these circumstances, we go toward, if we're going to make an error, that it be toward the side of saying that there's a person there. So here's something to think about. When we experience gratitude, and John Vervaeke has great things to say about the role of gratitude in his own practice of gratitude in his own life. If we're experiencing gratitude, should we, if we're going to make an error, should we err on the side of not thanking a person who's there, or should we, or rather, not thanking a person who's there, or thanking a person who maybe is not there? If you understand what I'm saying, it's like, well, why not say, well, I'm feeling grateful. I'm not sure if there's anyone to be grateful toward, but I will go ahead and thank a person rather than assume that I can experience this gratitude and that there's no person there to whom to be grateful. So those are just some thoughts I have that are drawn from, different threads of some of the conversations that have been going on in this corner of the internet. Now, there's just a couple of other things that I want to mention. One has to do with going back to this idea of seeing the patterns and the way reality lays itself out. I'm going to put a link to a video in the description by a man named Jeff Lawton, and this is Jeff, Geoff, okay? Jeff Lawton is the premier permaculture guru in the world. He is just, well, maybe there's one more, a guy named Sepp Halzer might be on his level, but Jeff Lawton is actually doing the miracle, and if you don't believe me, you can look at his channel and see it, of making the deserts bloom. He can do this, okay? And so you can look, when I put the link to his channel to this video, you can look at his videos on greening the desert. Just amazing work that he is doing in some of the hottest, driest places on earth. He's creating oases. And Jeff Lawton has a video about patterns and how we see patterns in nature and what is the origin of our ability to see patterns in nature, how patterns are formed. This goes along a lot with the things that Jonathan Pageau says, but I've never seen any real, any explicit connection made between these things. Now, the Jeff Lawton video about patterns is pretty rudimentary by YouTube standards. It shows him in a classroom. The sound quality is not phenomenal. It shows him in a classroom and he's writing on a chalkboard, okay? And he even misspells a couple of the words he puts on the chalkboard. And when you first see him, he is just such a down-to-earth guy. There's no pretension about him in the least. It doesn't look like the deep thing that it ends up being. I ask you to please stay with this video and stay with it until the end, because at the end, it is just mind-blowing. Here is what he comes to as the bottom line at the end, and he doesn't even make it explicit. He just puts it out there, but he doesn't really explicated down to the last. He doesn't take it as far as he can. You have to use your mind to like see how deep this thing goes. What he demonstrates is that an apple core is the model. He calls it the core model. When he says core model, he's referring to an apple core. An apple core is the model on which is based all of the sacred symbology of mankind. We're talking about the yin-yang symbol, we're talking about the infinity symbol, we're talking about all of this symbology and all of the patterns that we actually see in nature are derived from this particular shape, which, you know, if you're thinking about it from the standpoint of symbology, then you go, oh, apple. Well, what is it that opened the eyes of mankind to see the structures of reality in this way, with this intellect to be able to penetrate to the structures of reality, right? That we're doing. What is it that did that? And he says, think about Jordan Peterson talking about in the book of Genesis all the things, but this thing with the apple core, this is just phenomenal, where Jeff Lawton goes in this video. So I ask you to hang with the kind of amateurishness that it seems at the beginning, and it seems a little rambling and you don't know what his point is, and really listen and pay attention to what he's saying, because it is just phenomenal. And then there's one more video about deep structures of reality, and that is a video that I'm going to link to in the description, and it's by Rupert Sheldrake, and it's a video about water and where shapes of things, where forms may have originated from, is vibrations in contact with water. You can link that up with the ideas of Jeff Lawton, where he talks about what creates a pattern is the pressure between two mediums coming together and having an event. And so I'm gonna link those in the description, and you can look at them, and maybe somebody out there who's watching this would like to have a conversation with me about these things. And that's what I have to say about the conversations that are going on in our little corner of the internet, the ConverZations. And I hope to talk to you soon. I look forward to your comments in the comment section. Until we get together again, treat yourself as though you are someone you are responsible for helping, because you are responsible. So am I. And together we are making the world. Bye for now. Thanks so much for watching.